And we are live. Alrighty then. We have a lot to talk about this evening. And in fact, let me fix this here. There we go. Okay, let's first make sure everything is working properly. Looks like it is. Yeah, it is. There we go. Perfect. And so, a couple things I want to touch on first before we get to the weather. First of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it as always. The channel is growing and it's because of you and it's awesome. So thank you very much. I just want to touch on the fact I did have a death in the family. And that's going to impact the scheduling maybe for next week. There is probably a good chance that instead of Wednesday, it's going to be on Tuesday for the live chat next week. And then the following week, I'm going to just take a week off during the Christmas week just to be with family and do all that stuff. So that's why next week's going to be a little off, but we will have a regular live chat the last week of December. So definitely I'll update you guys on the details on all of that stuff. So we have a lot to talk about besides that. What did I say? Last week I said, watch for everyone to say winter canceled, winter's going to be over, and all this other nonsense. Even though we walked through and explained why the warm period that's on the way is necessary in order to establish the vertical transport of warm air into the stratosphere. And there are two ways of handling this in terms of the long range pattern. And we're going to talk about that, the GFS version and the European version, and why the two are very important. And of course, we have our light snow. It's actually snowing outside right now in Freehold and in many locations in northern New Jersey. And it certainly provides a more festive feel to the region right now. Not getting a lot of accumulation as expected, maybe a half an inch to an inch on a few cold surfaces. But I am keeping a very careful eye while we have this live chat on the evolution in Connecticut and Long Island. The reason why is because we're starting to see stretching in the atmosphere. So these are the winds at 500 millibars. And you see how there is this area of confluence and then diffluence. It's air coming in together and then getting stretched out. And that's happening right in this area right here. Okay, and it usually happens with this trough axis. And what happens when you start setting that up is that you start to develop this, well, basically this evolution of stretching in the atmosphere and twisting in the atmosphere. And so you start to develop at 850 millibars these little vortices. They're all over the place. And what happens is that at the surface, it starts to translate to a trough. See this confluence right here at the lower levels? In fact, let's zoom in on this. And you could see that confluence taking place here. So you start to get these little kinks here, these little troughs here starting to align themselves. And so what happens when you have all this stretching in the atmosphere is that you start getting this deformation axis, which we could see right here. This data is from the spc.noaa.gov with a deformation axis that starts to set up. And that leads to the potential for enhancement of snowfall or precipitation. And so what that leads to is this evolution. There's our snow rotating in, and we get a nice heavier burst. I would not be surprised, given the timing of this, around 9 to 10 p.m., that portions of Connecticut, portions of Long Island, end up with anywhere from a dusting to 2 inches of snow out of this. And by the way, I will be covering you guys I'll be taking all your questions too and going back. So I just kind of want to walk through everything that I'm seeing, as always, as I do every week. So this really has my eye. I think some people are going to be in for a bit of a surprise on Long Island tonight. Connecticut, I think people are more prepared for this, but don't be surprised in Long Island, especially on the North Shore, that you get a nice little 1, maybe 2 inches of snow out of this when you wake up tomorrow morning. Certainly happening between now and midnight. So that's all because of the stretching in the atmosphere that we're starting to see now. Now, let's get into the long range weather. And again, I'll come back to you guys with all your questions after this. So load them in, and I'll walk through and go over everything. So let's take a look at what's the environment right now. We'll start at 10 millibars, and we'll zoom out here. Take a look at the Arctic, and notice in the observations we have a little bit of a stretch here, but for the most part we have a strong polar vortex. Okay, no denying that. That's what's going to lead to our warm weather pattern really locking in. The same thing is seen at 70 millibars. Nice organization. You have a little bit of a split here, a little bit of a stretching, but that's starting to collapse, and this is starting to gain strength. So this all tells me, yep, our mild pattern is definitely on the way. Fine. When we take a look at all the other factors, and again, I'll quickly go over the tropical forcing. Still, east-based La Nina, still weak. Okay, very clear. Not as strong of a signal in the PDO department, negative PDO department. It's weakened a little bit, but it's still clearly plenty of warm water over the Central Pacific here. Our Atlantic is very warm as well. We are seeing the SOI values stay in the weak zone. Our tropical convection, let's walk through that. And you're seeing a lot of convection around the Philippines, around the Southeast Asia, and you still have a hint of that convection around the dateline. It's very weak, but it can redevelop. Of course, almost nothing around the eastern zones of La Nina. And we also have a very active Pacific jet stream, polar jet stream. And then we have the MJO, which the latest guidance, I'll walk you through it, the GFS ensembles goes from phase 6 to 7 and heading towards 8. Same thing with another ensemble run of the GFS. The CFS is showing the same thing. The European, as you can see, and the European ensembles is going into phase 7 and in some cases phase 8. And there's a lot of guidance suggesting that this is going into phase 8 as we head between late December and January. And as you guys know, phase 7 and 8 starts to transition towards that cold. Solutions are more likely, and more high latitude blocking is likely in the phase 7, 8, and 1 for us. And 2 is pretty good for us too in the winter. So we see all that with the tropical forcing. In the observations, again, we're looking just at observations here. This is the EP flux. This is the transport of air, warm air, from the troposphere up to the stratosphere. And as you can see here, it's been pretty robust. And that has led to, pull up this observation here, or reset it. Keep an eye on this. Watch this. Okay, so there's our cold phase. It's shrinking away. And here comes our next stratospheric warming. They're starting to push northward towards the North Pole. The question is, does this succeed? That's pretty much the whole question. And so we take a look at the model guidance, the European model guidance. We'll start with that first. And you can see the EP flux is pretty strong. Now again, what does this mean? this means warm air is being transported from the troposphere to the stratosphere. When you have this evolving, it can support a very strong mechanism to have disruption of the polar vortex. But there's another way to look at this. And that comes to this question here. The difference in the models between the European, which has a stretching and weakening polar vortex 10 days out, and the GFS guidance, which really doesn't, is a matter of which aspect of forcing mechanisms is going to influence the polar vortex evolution. There's some support of the cooler stratosphere remaining in place. And as a result of that process, the colder environment at 10 millibars gets transported down towards the troposphere, which causes a strengthening polar vortex and basically continues on with a positive Arctic oscillation. That would be the GFS solution. The European solution is no, you're getting all this warm air transported from the troposphere to the stratosphere. That's going to overwhelm the cold air aspect of the 10 millibar stratosphere and disrupt and weaken the polar vortex. So there is significant volatility and separation between these models because there is a question of how does this evolution take place? Does the colder environment at 10 millibars overwhelm the entire weather pattern, thus creating a mild weather pattern for much of the winter? Or does the disruption that we saw in November, that we are starting to see again in the observations that would be more supported with the tropical forcing that we're seeing, take over and disrupt the polar vortex, especially at the tropospheric level where we are? Okay, that's 500 millibars. I think we're going to see a disruption. That's basically the forecast I have in place based on all the observations I'm seeing. With that, this is the make or break for pretty much the whole winter. Does this disruption process take hold or does it not? And the reason why you have two camps is that you have two competing forcing mechanisms involved here. And you can make an argument for each one having a more viable solution. In fact, I read today with Dr. Cohen. If you read his blog from AAR, it was very well written, and it broke down the reasons why the cold stratosphere solution might be more reasonable. He wasn't 100% sure, which is very reasonable, but he was basically saying, like, look, the last time we saw anything like this was the late 1980s, early 1990s. And if any of you guys are old enough to remember that, wasn't exactly very fun for snow lovers back then. Not many major winter storms, a lot of hit and misses like what we're seeing right now for tonight. But yes, there is that aspect of it that's out there. But the important thing to remember is that in those cases, we did not have that type of EP flux that we're seeing right now, that transport. So it's very interesting to see how this is all going to play out. Does this support the idea of sustained mild weather as far as the cold environment? It makes it more likely, but it doesn't lock it in because you can still have the strong polar vortex, but still have the other factors coming in like the MJO and whatnot to override that, in the east-based La Nina and so on and so forth. So we have to monitor that, okay? So that is pretty much the question as we look at this data. Do we end up with this in 10 days out? where we start to see significant stretching. And this is what catches my eye here. Not so much the orientation of this trough, but this ridge right here. If this pops like this, then we're going to have a major disruption. And the warm transport won. Okay? If we end up like that, where it's not very strong, it's kind of flat, then the polar vortex remains strong, because this isn't strong enough to really disrupt the polar vortex and stretch it. And that's how you end up with this solution. So that is the bottom line here. That's the key. How does that transport evolve? And with this, we'll have to watch to see exactly how this whole process evolves and plays out. But you can see on the GFS solution, there's still an idea that there might be some stretching here that goes on. So the model guidance is trying to pick up on the disruption idea, but it's struggling. It's a much stronger sign on the European guidance. So that's pretty much where we are at in terms of the winter forecast and where we're going with that. And from there, I'm going to take your questions. Let me just reload the radar here. You can see it's still snowing outside. Yep, still nice snowfall outside. So I'm going to take your questions, and we'll do the premium chat first, and then we'll check out YouTube, see if we got any questions there while we are watching this snowfall. So we'll keep the radar up, and we'll continue to monitor the evolution of this snowfall and take a look at the observations. And then in the meantime, I will answer your questions. And yep, it is pretty good snowfall showing up. Very nice. It's nice to do a live chat while it's snowing, I'll tell you that much. So let's see what we got here. We'll scroll back up. Okay, of course, good evening, everyone. And thank you for the condolences. I appreciate it. Okay, light, wet, slushy snow on cars, ground, and roads are wet in Union County. Okay, thank you, Card. Let's see. Tom Keats reports that we had at least 2 inches with the last batch of snow this evening in northern Wayne County, Pennsylvania. Well, that means that the forecast verified. That'd be awesome. I wasn't exactly expecting that based on what I was seeing this afternoon, but hey, it makes me happy with the forecast then, and most of it verified then. Let's see here. 10 millibar level looks really interesting on Earth New School. Yep, we just checked that out. Is there a bit of a break in the intensity of the jet streak heading to the polar regions, but the polar circulation looks stretched out more like a paperclip, and the feed into the circulation looks to be from even deeper in the tropical Pacific? Yeah, that's essentially happening. I think what we're starting to see in the observations is that negative QBO transport mechanism really starting to take hold and starting to influence the stratospheric environment. Again, the key question here is, how does this all play out in terms of transport of air masses from the surface to the stratosphere? If that is as strong as what's being shown in the model guidance on the European guidance, again, that EP flux, that difference, that's the difference between the GFS, which is much weaker, and the European. Now, the new GFS that came out with the 18Z guidance, which I don't trust 100%, suggests more like the European, more like a stronger signal. So that could certainly be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. One quiet, stable sunspot yesterday and today, not a blank sun, but remarkably quiet for a period when activity is supposed to be ramping up. Yep, yeah, as I said, Card, this solar cycle is, it's active, but it's not anywhere. It's actually less than what I saw with solar cycle 24, which is something which, again, kind of feeds into the potential for a grand solar minimum to take hold as we go forward in the next couple of decades. And how that impacts our weather pattern is going to be very interesting. And it's going to be interesting to see how climate models handle that aspect, because it'll be the first time that we've had observational data as strong as we have it with satellites and whatnot in a grand solar minimum, where we could actually test the theories that we have on how climate and the sun impacts how the sun impacts climate and whether or not it has a stronger influence or not. There are theories, and the theories are, well, CO2 and the greenhouse effect is having a stronger impact, but that theory is going to get put to the test over the next 30, 40 years. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. Is there a third possibility, strong polar vortex, but one that is displaced from the pole? That is possible. It's hard to pull off, and it's not something that I try to predict, because in order for that to happen, literally everything has to go right. This would be the stratospheric version of thread the needle, okay, where you get the Scandinavian high building and strong enough to basically knock the polar vortex off its axis and send it towards North America. It can happen, but even in that situation, it's usually a cold, dry pattern that results. But we'll see how it plays out. What can we expect with rain and storms this weekend? Good question, James. I think we're going to be looking at some severe thunderstorms. The 850 millibar jet streak around that time period, and let me pull that up and we'll come back to the radar later. So let me pull up 850 millibars right here. Pull that up. And here we are. Okay. So you have this jet streak moving through Saturday evening, and this puts you somewhere around between 60 and 70 knots with this jet streak, with this cold front coming through that's going to enhance convection. And that means that we have a pretty good shot here, if we get enough instability in the atmosphere, to support severe thunderstorms. I would say that with the cold front passage, you're probably looking about half an inch to maybe an inch and a half of rain marching its way through in the evening hours. It's not going to be your traditional severe thunderstorm, but it's going to be one where you get occasional lightning. But my primary concern is going to be the strong wind gusts on Saturday evening, where we could see a few isolated thunderstorms push into that 60 mile per hour wind gust range and possibly instigate a severe thunderstorm warning. I don't think it would be widespread, but something to certainly keep an eye on. Let's see here. Rob Allen says, I also read Dr. Cohen's blog. What confused me was the years he mentioned, cold PCH, were some of the most memorable snow nor'easter years. Why is that? Because, okay, this is a great point. Okay, the polar vortex, much like La Nina, much like the MJO, by itself is not the end-all be-all in the evolution of a weather pattern. The evolution of a weather pattern and the potential for snow and stormy weather is a result of a combination of factors. So let's say that the polar vortex is relatively strong, but it's displaced, like the question earlier. Then you can end up in a situation where you get a negative EPO pattern in the troposphere, and you end up with a very stormy, snowy weather pattern. Also, at times, what happens is that you end up with a strong polar vortex, and the PCH is cold, but is displaced from the troposphere, i.e., what's happening in the stratosphere is not influencing the troposphere. That happens sometimes. In fact, it happens in the reverse, where you have a strong stratospheric warming event, and it's very impressive at 10 millibars, 30 millibars, 50 millibars. But by the time it gets to 100 millibars, it peters out. And so it has no impact on the troposphere. That happens sometimes. And we're still trying to figure out why that's the case. It could be Some theorize it's the way that the QBO evolves. Some theorize that it could be a factor of how the transport down towards the surface weakens based on tropical forcing in the atmosphere, or possibly some mountain torque impacts in the way that the air moves over mountain ranges, certain mountain ranges, and how that can impact that transport process. We still are studying that, and there's still a lot of research going on in terms of how that process works out. So that's why when you're looking at these factors, you never say, okay, we're going to look at the stratosphere, and whatever happens in the stratosphere, that tells you what the winter is going to be. Or strong polar vortex, therefore a mild winter. Put it in the bank. It doesn't work like that. I wish it worked like that. My job would be easy. Are you kidding me? Winter forecasting would be a breeze if all I had to do was say strong polar vortex, weak polar vortex. I wish it was that easy, but it's not. And so in some of the years that he mentioned, yeah, they're very impressive years, because what happens is that, yeah, you don't get the cold air and the troposphere to push all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, but you get that cold air, Arctic air pushing down towards the Great Lakes. The northern mid-Atlantic gets caught into a very strong thermal gradient between the mild air over the southeast, and you get storm after storm marching through the northern mid-Atlantic with waves of snowfall and heavy rain down towards Washington, D.C., while Philadelphia and New York City are getting heavy snow. So definitely you can get those type of patterns in a strong tropospheric environment. So whether or not the polar vortex is strong or weak is not the end of winter, but it certainly creates a more difficult environment to support storms. But it's not impossible. It has to depend on how that all plays out. Let's see here. Joshua asks, I see Dr. Cohen only bases forecasts only on the GFS. He has said that he doesn't get the European models. Yes, that's true. Little head tip, I do help him out with that. Send over some data for him to read. And I think he does incorporate that in his analysis. But there are always reasons why you can put out the GFS a lot easier than the European. Those issues have changed, but that's why he uses it for the most part, because he has more free reign on what to do with that data. Denny asks, hey Steve, are you saying that you are not as confident in a cold and stormy pattern late this month now? Is your winter forecast in trouble? Good question, Denny. I am personally still confident in where I'm sitting with this forecast. Pretty much every aspect of the forecast that I have been talking about, from the chilly start in December and the active pattern in November. Actually, let me reverse that. The active pattern in November, the chilly start in December, and then the turn to mild conditions for the middle of the month, and then my idea of transversing back towards the end of the month, all looks good. The tropical forcing is panning out exactly as I expected. The EP Flex evolution panning out exactly as I expected. However, I would be irresponsible if I didn't point out, okay, here's where things can go wrong. Okay, if I just said, hey, the forecast is going great, nothing to worry about, definitely going to be a cold and stormy weather pattern, and I didn't even mention some of the factors that could go wrong, then I would be doing you a disservice, because then you wouldn't know, hey, this is how things could go wrong, or this is what might not transpire. Okay, and what does that mean for the forecast and how I prepare for my business, travel, whatever. Okay, if all I did was just give you all the data that supports my theories on how this is all going to evolve and how I think the winter's going to turn out, and not look at what other people are saying and pointing out those factors, then I would be a bad meteorologist, and point blank. So it's important to go over some of these factors. What is the timing for Saturday's storm? Have a bunch of stuff on Saturday. Scattered showers throughout the day on Saturday, but the thunderstorms look to be moving through in the evening after 6 p.m. That will change. Keep an eye on the forecast as we get closer and I get a better idea on the cold front timing. Todd Keats says, Steve, when did meteorologists start paying attention to the polar vortex in the forecast? We never heard of it in the 70s, early 2000s, or at least it wasn't discussed as it is now. Great question. Okay. In technical realms, the polar vortex has always been discussed since about the 60s. Okay. The change happened really with social media. Social media, you started to get meteorologists and really technical guys start talking about the polar vortex. And of course, then you get the media who are looking to sell articles go crazy, like as if this is some sort of large hurricane or something, which it isn't. But it sounds scary. Ooh, polar vortex. So as a result, that's how the term got into the mainstream a lot more. We've always talked about it. In fact, a lot of the meteorology books and a lot of studying I did up in Oswego, we talked about it quite a bit, about the evolution of the polar vortex and different layers of the atmosphere and why it matters. But we hear it now more because you could actually talk to a meteorologist and they talk about it. And we're talking about it amongst each other. So you can see that. So that's why it's being discussed more. Also, the research and the data collection is so much better now. So now we're getting better and better theories. We're understanding the atmosphere more and more. What role zonal winds play? I saw a forecast that said strong zonal winds can prevent cold from entering the U.S., but the forecast was only for the next 10 days. Yes, the zonal winds, let me pull that up. And you guys on YouTube, I'm going to get to you after I knock off all the premium questions here. Okay, so this is what they're talking about. Zonal, when winds go from west to east. Okay, so what's happening here is that the polar vortex is starting to go through changes. All right, you can see that with the way that the wind structures, you see how they're kind of broken up into different vortices here. Now what's happening is that you get this deep trough that develops as a result off the west coast here, and that leads to basically a broad ridge over much of the United States and this zonal wind. So you get your Pacific air mass just running right across the United States. So this zonal wind is basically a description of the jet stream. That's pretty much it. Nothing unusual or nothing that is a new feature or separate feature. Isn't that kind of rain in D.C., snow in New York City not uncommon in East-based La Ninas? Bingo! Good job, card. 12Z models were hinting at a potential for active December 23rd, 25th timeframe. Are you buying Storm Signal? Well, since I'll be traveling, it does make sense, right? It would be my luck. But I think that's possible. I think it fits into the forecast. I wouldn't buy any details, and I wouldn't be banking on any of the details. I would say that the potential is understandable and supported if the ideas that I have with the forecast verify. So I'll put it that way. Okay, let me take a look at. Whoa! Look at YouTube. You guys are active. Driving down in Florida, December 23rd, 8 p.m. Returning home, Rockland, December 30th. Hope all is mild and dry. Best of luck, Kenneth. Heard of quite a severe weather event for Saturday in Ohio. Yes. Yeah, there's going to be a heck of a severe thunderstorm set up, playing its way out for this weekend. Actually, for the end of the week on through the weekend. We could actually see a pretty healthy tornado outbreak set up in the Tennessee River Valley. So that should be something. Let's see here. Think we'll have to worry about ice on the roads for tonight. Yeah, I would definitely be cautious of slick roadways. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would definitely keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, let's go back to the radar and see. Let me refresh. And yep, it's starting to evolve here. Let's see what the observations are saying. Now the good news is that our temperatures are above freezing, so I think that's going to save your roadways in Long Island for a little bit. Connecticut, you're below freezing and you're seeing snow accumulation, so we're definitely seeing that take place. Just doing a quick check on social media, and let's see here. We're getting some snowfall observations showing up here. Pretty good snowfall that took place in northern Jersey. Look at this. Very nice. Well, I guess that forecast verified. That works. And let me pull back up here. Okay. Let's see. Question here. By what date the models can be trusted for a polar vortex disruption that are showing? I mean, they can keep changing further out. Excellent question. Okay. I generally trust long range forecasts, especially with stratosphere and the 7 to 10 day level. In the 10 to 15 day period, you kind of get a hint of where models are going, but there have been plenty of times where it has shown either a strong polar vortex or a major disruption or even a split, and then you get below 10 days and it disappears, or it's much weaker than what's forecasted. So I like to get to 10 days out to really trust an evolution. Then I want to get below 7 days out or 168 hours out to really trust that it's going to actually evolve. And then once we get below 90 hours out, then dive into some of the smaller details and whatnot, much like a winter storm. And the reason why is because of the resolution of the models. Now, this isn't to say that that there's no use to 10 to 15 day solutions. I'm just saying that they're more likely to change quite a bit than lock into a forecast. All right, and the observations that are fed in, like I cannot wait when these, where are you? Oh, you're somewhere around here. There it is. When this gets fed into the model guidance, okay, which should be in the 0Z and 12Z guidance. If this starts to expand towards North America, then, ladies and gentlemen, that polar vortex is going to get disrupted. It's going to get smacked around like a piñata. So we're going to see just how well these models play out. Matthew Myers asks, if the cold and snowy pattern verifies late month, how long will it last and will it turn warmer in mid-January? Typically, these type of patterns last for about 2 to 4 weeks. Then they kind of go through a reset. So I like the idea. If the late December idea plans out, then I expect a relaxation sometime in the middle of January, and then returning again for late January to early February for one final go around. But again, we have to work with, once it forms, then work on a timing and evolution based on what we're seeing with the MJO and with the way that the polar vortex is disrupted. Day 3 on SPC severe weather map has a rather large slight risk area from East Texas up to Indiana. Yeah, it's going to be a busy one, that is for sure. All right, off to YouTube. Think we'll have to worry. Here we are. How long do you think the upcoming warm pattern next week is going to last for? Well, generally, I have the pattern breaking down December 20th. That's where I'm thinking right now. See, here's the thing. I'm not convinced it's going to get... How do I put this? There are some people running around saying it's going to get into the 60s and 70s around here. Look, maybe Washington, D.C., probably North Carolina. But here, in the Northern Atlantic, no. I like the idea of all right, so we'll spike up into the 60s for 1 or 2 days ahead of strong cold fronts. But I think generally we'll be in the 40s and 50s. So we'll be in a warm pattern, definitely above normal. But I don't buy this whole historic warmth or anything like that nature. Again, maybe in the upper Midwest, which should be interesting because they're expecting like 12 inches of snow over there this weekend. So then you're going to have pretty significant melts. You might hear about flooding in that situation. Um, but I like the idea of cutting this down around December 20th or so. But great question tonight, guys. Absolutely outstanding questions. Let's see. Right now, I'm looking on the radar to see if we start to get those stronger echoes showing up. Tell you what, let me take off the winter mask. And so what we should see, if the guidance is correct, let's pull up the HRR guidance. So we got new guidance coming out. Okay, so we should see an intensification on the shores of Connecticut and the north side of Long Island towards the basically in the next several minutes. And the HRR is kind of underplaying some of this precipitation, which is interesting. So this is going to be fun to see how this plays out. Let's see here. Stephen, if we get, this is from Card, if we get any days with spots in the 60s, my guess is the urban heat get it, and it's from concrete pavement as much as the air itself. Definitely an aspect of it. I would definitely look towards southwestern New Jersey, the southern Delaware River Valley. That's where I would definitely look for those type of temperatures. Any chance the pattern breaks down sooner? I don't think so. You would need to have the polar vortex just get blown up, like Death Star blown up, okay? I don't see that happening. I see this more as an evolution. Does Antarctic warming give us clues to Arctic warming? No. The evolution that happens in the Antarctic, which is basically, right now it's their summer, okay, is separate from what goes on in the Arctic. There are different forcing mechanisms. For one, the Antarctic is a continent. It's mostly land and ice, whereas, and you're seeing some melting of the sea ice, but it's nothing as significant as what you have in the Arctic. The Arctic, what you're seeing there, because you don't have a lot of land mass, it's all sea. It's mostly sea based, so it's easier to create more dramatic sea ice loss, obviously, and it's easier to warm the environment in the Arctic much more than the Antarctic. So as a result, the changes in the Arctic are far more volatile, and there's far more different forcing mechanisms involved in that evolution. So what happens in the Antarctic really does not have any strong influence on the northern hemisphere, nor, and certainly not on the Arctic environment itself. They're just separated too far. By 12th of December, should we expect some kind of confirmation of disruption of polar vortex being shown in the models? All right, timing. I would say I think it was the 15th. Yeah. I would say when we get to the 15th of December, that's going to lock in exactly what we can expect. So over the next 7 days, we're going to see a lot of changes in the model guidance and how that evolves. And you're going to see a lot of knuckleheads running around screaming winter's canceled and all sort of crap. But that, I think, is going to be where the real the real apex is going to set up. The next 7 days are going to be extremely interesting because you're going to have this battle take place, right, guys? Where you're going to have this colder environment at 10 millibars, right? So here's 10 millibars, right? Your cold air. And meanwhile, you're going to have this warm air punching up on it. Okay, now that punching up is EP flux. So does that get knocked out of the way? Or does the cold air stay locked in and then press south? Press down. Not south, down. Okay? That's the question. And the reason why we're uncertain is because of chaos theory and our experience with this type of evolution. So it's certainly a lot to learn about. The Antarctic is also, a card says, the Antarctic is also surrounded by wide open oceans that have winds that have no land mass to slow down. As the circulation around the southern hemisphere, there is reasonable 60 lat south is called the Shrieking 60s. Absolutely. It's a completely different environment. So I know a lot of people try to make connections. I don't know why, but they do. But research, pretty much all research, has found that there's very little impact because the locations are so far away. Will it snow this winter? Well, it already snowed. It's snowing outside right now. Go to your window. Dylan, go to your window right now. It's snowing. So there, you're done for the winter. It snowed. So there we go. We're locked in. We have already verified. Take that to the bank. I'm going to have a hot chocolate on that one. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to drink too much too late. You know, when you get older, you don't want to drink too much too late in the night. You know, it's not a good thing. When you're a kid, you can have hot chocolate at midnight. It doesn't matter. But when you get older, no, you don't like get woken up. No. Remember, like when we were a kid, we get excited about being able to stay up past 9 o'clock, maybe have a pizza. That's like the greatest thing in the world. Now I'm like, I can't stay up past 8. Like, guys.
Wired differently, remember that.
Yeah, that's true too.
My mother was always yelling at me to go to sleep because I'd be awake half the night.
Yeah, that's true. The only impact Antarctica will have on our weather is if King Dora woke up. Yes, that'd be true. That'd be fun, man. That'd be interesting. But yeah, I mean, no, not to mess with you, Dylan, but yeah, it's snowing outside right now. So not for long, but it did snow. It is currently snowing in Belmar and it's snowing outside in Freehold, New Jersey, in which I ran to the window like a 4-year-old kid about 4 or 5 times with the snow flurries. Got all excited. So that doesn't surprise me. Yep. That's, if you're in Manhattan and it's light rain, you could blame the urban heat island effect and all those subways. New York City, in order to get snow accumulation, you really have to be around 30 degrees. If you're at 32 degrees, it'll snow in the air, but it's really hard to get the snow in the pavement. You want to get to 30 degrees, and then you start to get into the game. Same thing, you could also make that same statement for Philadelphia as well. Once you get away from the major cities, if you get to 35, you could get snow accumulation. I've seen it around here plenty of times. Let's see if we got any more sign of our snow. We're starting to get a little bit stronger echoes showing up. We're starting this outside of Connecticut and on Long Island. So we'll see whether or not that transpires to snowfall. It's light rain in Manhattan. Yep. Let's see. I'm just pulling up some observational data, see if we got anything new. Well, we certainly have a lot of reports on Twitter of snowfall. Pretty impressive, too. So that's certainly something. And in particular with steam pipes underground also. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really, Manhattan is the A1 example of a major urban heat island effect. I mean, you got subways, steam pipes, large buildings, concrete all over the place. Um, it's nearly impossible to get a freezing rain event in there. Like you have to have like rain with temperatures in the mid to upper 20s really to pull that off. Uh, any change in snow growth in Siberia? It's pretty much stabilized. It was slightly below normal in the advance in November, but that it's debatable whether or not that has a significant impact on the weather pattern. But it's pretty much stabilized to near normal. Let's see here. Just looking for other questions. In the meantime, oh, yep, there we are. There's some heavier echoes showing up. Now, I'm curious to see. There's our stretching that's showing up better. There's our deformation zone. That's starting to show up. Now, again, this isn't a major storm or anything of that nature, but it'll create a nice little burst, and this stretching in the atmosphere will start to cool the atmosphere around Long Island, and especially on the south shore of Connecticut. So I'm expecting, yeah, we're down to 35 in snow in JFK, 36 in eastern Long Island. Montauk's down to 38. The Connecticut coast, let's zoom in on this here. Islip is at 35. So we're starting to see that cooling effect. Newark's snow at 36. Belmar 34, snow. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is that our boundary layers are cooling because they're stretching in the atmosphere. Obviously, as you move away from Manhattan, you're more likely to get snow out of this than a rain-snow mix. Snow growth in Canada is, well, let's see, I haven't looked at that in a while, so let me pull that up. Observations. Let's see here. Where's Rutgers? All right. So, as you can see, there's the daily snow. And our departures, well, Canada is fine. Northern portion of the United States is still below normal. But in terms of the observations, Canada is snow-packed. This right here is an error, actually. That little missing blob. There is no square of no snow. Wow, there we go. And our visibility has fallen to around 4 to 6 miles. So that's a light snowfall. Let's see here. How does a pattern in winter feedback on itself and continue? Okay, so basically what happens with that, and again, let me pull up the radar just so we have that. Okay, so what happens is that you get these high latitude blocks, right? So let's say you get a strong upper level low. The strong upper level low feeds the high. This high feeds, creates an imbalance and then feeds the low. So you have air moving from one section to the other, and they constantly try to create a balance. And so the block setup instigates more storms to the south and west. Those storms feed into the upper level low, let's say around, 50 north, 50 west, and that instigates the stronger high over Greenland. And so you get that feedback continuing until at some point it breaks, usually with a shift that's happening in the Pacific, for example. So that's how usually they feed back on itself, because the atmosphere is trying to balance itself out. So every time you get a major storm, because of the block, that enhances the block itself, and then leads to a continuation of that block, which leads to another threat for another storm. That snow should help reduce moderation of cold air masses coming south, correct? Absolutely, yes. All right. And let's see, is there any more questions in YouTube land? We got more questions here. Let's see here. If the cold weather doesn't show up late month, could it be possible that the winter is back-ended loaded and gets cold and snowy towards the end of winter? Absolutely, it's possible. It's unusual for La Ninas, but it's definitely possible. Even in east-based La Ninas, the bulk of your winter is still typically in January and February, but it's more like early January through early February, whereas in El Nino, it's more like mid-January through early March, okay? The idea of winter in December is more based on Hollywood movies than actual climatology. In fact, I posted a map a couple of days ago with expected snowfall for Christmas, and to have 1 inch of snow on the ground, now I'm not even talking about snowing, just snow on the ground of 1 inch, there's a 10 to 15% chance of that happening on the coastal plain. I'm sorry, 5 to 15% chance on the coastal plain, and 15 to 20% chance in the Poconos and Catskills, your mountains. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how difficult it is to pull off a significant snowfall in December. So, can winter be backloaded? Absolutely. This year, absolutely. I'm not expecting that, but it's definitely possible. Just realized that front on Saturday may impact Army-Navy game. Yep, it just might. Probably will. It'd be an interesting one, that's for sure. Okay, so we are coming in at 9 o'clock. We're going to get ready to shut it down. One last question came in. Is it possible to have a longer winter with snow stretching to the end of March? God, I hope not. I don't see that happening. Usually you don't see that with a weakening La Nina. You usually see that more with a weakening El Nino than La Nina. So I'm not expecting it. Any Sunday NFL weather impact expected? Honestly, no. I mean, it might be a bit windy for any games in the Northeast. Or there might be a bit of a wind impact, but nothing like what you saw with the Buffalo game a couple of days ago. No, nothing like that. Nothing like that. In fact, it's going to be pretty. Once that cold front moves through, it's actually going to be pretty quiet for much of the nation. So I don't expect too much of a significant weather impact on your NFL games. All right, so that's it for tonight. We had some snow. It's the first chat where we had some snow, so I hope you guys enjoyed that walkthrough. We have an idea of what to expect with the winter pattern, okay, with in terms of what we're looking for our polar vortex. Oh, and of course, once again, because of the personal situation, more than likely I will update on this. More than likely we'll have a live chat on Tuesday, not Wednesday, and then I'm going to be taking some time off after that, and then return for the final week of December, kind of like a New Year's Eve celebration, and we'll have a little bit of fun with that on the Wednesday before the end of this year. Huh? What? Oh. Okay. Yeah. The reason why, just so you guys know, is unfortunately death in the family, so we're gonna have to deal with that. And I think the wake might be on Wednesday of next week, and then the funeral. So we're gonna have to watch that out. So I will keep you guys posted on that, and we'll go from there. Have a wonderful night, guys, and as always, stay safe out there.